In these posture clinic sessions, we're going to be breaking down postures. This one's a little bit different. As you probably saw from the title, this one said Posture Clinic Pelvis. And that's because I kind of feel like we need to have a conversation about the pelvis, basically. Because every pose comes from the pelvis. Everything starts in the pelvis. Whatever's happening in the pelvis will influence what's happening in the rest of the spine. And as you've probably heard me say 100 times already by now, even though we're only in week 1, is that two of the main things I'm looking at in every pose are liberating the spine and liberating the breath. Or facilitating a long spine and facilitating the breath. So what's happening with the pelvis is going to be the thing that initiates what's happening in the rest of the spine. No, it's the foundation. The pelvis is the foundation of the spine. If your foundation is off, everything is going to be out of balance above. So particularly what I'm interested in right now is just looking at the forwards and backwards tilt, or anterior tilt and posterior tilt, if you're using anatomy speech. So I'm just going to use Charlie for a moment. So Charlie, if you can come stand on the mat, please, and you can face that way. Okay, and just imagine that Charlie's pelvis is a basin or a bowl of water. And so it's filled with water, and if she tilts her pelvis forwards, the water will pour out the top forward. So let's bring your hands to your hips and just do a forward tilt. Yeah, so she's tilting forwards and accentuate it. Yeah, now the water is pouring out the top here. Now do a backwards tilt. Accentuate, so tuck your tailbone under as much as you can. Yes, now it's going to start pouring out the back. So just go to those two extremes a few times. So this is a forwards tilt, and this is a backwards tilt. Yeah, and see if you can isolate your upper body, so it's just happening with your pelvis. I'll do the same. So forwards tilt and backwards tilt. So with a forwards tilt, you're lifting your tailbone up, and with a backwards tilt, you're lifting your pubic bone up as much as you can. Good, okay, let's take a break. So you can just have a seat. So yeah, this forward tilt, backward tilt the pelvis, and this is going to be really important in a lot of poses. What's happening with your pelvis? What are you doing? And sometimes you might be naturally going too far forward. Sometimes you'll be tucking too much. It's what we call tucking. This thing you hear some yoga teachers say, tuck the tailbone under, which I think is a terrible cue, because it's almost never in yoga are we looking for that level of backgrounding that you would tuck your tailbone under. But yeah, so often what's happening is, if you look at when I do a forward tilt, as I forward tilt the pelvis, it accentuates the curve, the arch of my back. So as I forward tilt the pelvis, if I keep everything else the same, it creates a more extreme lumbar curve, more extreme curve in the lower back. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm concentrating the forces there. And then same with the opposite, that if I keep everything else the same, but I do a posterior tilt, then I'm creating excessive rounding of the lower back. So, Charlie, would you mind coming to hands and knees, please? Let's look at the same thing here, the sort of cat-cow type motion. Again, watch the pelvis. As she tilts the pelvis forwards, she creates an arch. And as she tilts the pelvis back, she creates rounding. Right? Now that's going to be really, really important, especially, just do it a few more times so we can just see that. That's going to be really, really important, especially as we come into doing forward folds or back bends. If Charlie, you wouldn't mind standing up once again. There's a very simple golden rule, which is as follows. If Charlie wants to do a forward fold, her pelvis tilts forwards. Okay? If Charlie wants to do a back bend, we can just do a standing back bend, the pelvis will tilt back. If you don't do that, If you do the opposite to that, then you're going to concentrate forces in one area of your spine. And that's not what we want to do in yoga. In yoga, we're always looking to distribute forces as evenly as possible. But if Charlie does the opposite, so let me just show the correct way again, right? Everything starts from the pelvis. So forward fold starts from the pelvis. So it's the pelvis that's moving. Look, her spine hasn't rounded at all. She's got a straight spine. It's only her pelvis that's going forward, 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 until she reaches her end range of motion, and now the back goes forwards. But the forward fold came from the pelvis, yeah? The pelvis tilted forwards, the back came second, and then she comes up, back up to standing, and let's just do the reverse. If she wants to come into a back bend, then she starts in the pelvis, start to rotate back, 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 yes, and then heart and head come. Now, if she was to do the opposite to that, what would happen? Let's have a look. So from here, she's going to fold forwards, but as she folds forwards, she's going to tilt her pelvis back, right? What? No, the other way. This way as you fold forwards. Now what happens? She can't go anywhere near as far. Yeah, and she's massive rounding, and she can't go any further than this. This is what happens if you tilt the pelvis back in a forward fold. She's concentrating a lot of the forces here. And let's look at the opposite. Come up to neutral. From here, she's going to tilt her pelvis forwards and try and back bend. So pelvis forward, no, pelvis forwards, yes. And then back bend from there. Yes, it's very, very difficult. And what happens is she's probably feeling a lot here, right? So, simple rule. If you want to do a forward fold, your pelvis goes forwards. You want to do a back bend, your pelvis tilts backwards. So let's just look at it the right way again. Just going to do a forward fold, starting from the pelvis. Keep your back straight or long. Just the pelvis, just the pelvis, just the pelvis. Yes. So it's just the pelvis going forwards. Good. Now come back up. Let's start with, get a straight back. So lift your heart, 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 until you're straight, and then from the pelvis. Yes. Good. And then back. So the pelvis, so your back bend, the pelvis is tilting back. Heart up and back. Yeah. Good. And this pelvis is tilting that way. If she tilts the other way, it's going to be ouch. So, you can come down. That's it. So that's really what I want to get across is if you're doing a forward fold, then your pelvis should be tilting forwards. If you're doing a back bend, your pelvis should be tilting backwards. So nice and easy to remember. And sometimes you'll notice that you're in a pose and someone is perhaps they find themselves in a back bend, or that they're in extreme rounding. And if you see that they're either too rounded or they are too arched, then you now know that you can start to fix that by adjusting the pelvis. So Charlie, if you could do a warrior two, but go this way, so not across the mat. Yeah, and let's say that Charlie was in a warrior two where she's massively, massively rounding. So yeah, tilt the pelvis forwards. Yeah, so now you can see, you look at this person and she's like, oh wow, she's in warrior two, but she's in a huge back bend in this warrior two. It's because her pelvis is tilted forwards and she's leaning back. So the answer to this is, hey Charlie, lengthen your tailbone down towards the floor, lift your pubic bone up. Yes, boom. Now we're just talking about bringing the pelvis back to neutral. And the opposite could be true. She might be over tucking, so tuck your tailbone under. And yeah, now so like you're rounding your back. Yeah, so this person might need to do actually do the opposite. And for Charlie, she wants to forward tilt her pelvis. So we might say, so lift the tailbone up. Lift the tailbone up. Yes. So then she's getting a bit more of the arch. So whether you have arching or whether you have rounding is often a lot to do with the position of the pelvis. And just by giving a small instruction on lengthen the tailbone down, or lift the pubic bone up, or lift the hip points up, this kind of thing is going to resolve that problem. So this is just a little posture clinic about that particular thing, about the position of the pelvis, and it'll come up again and again and again in pose after pose. Thank you.